So it's important to point out that it's not that Nigeria hasn't had ID system. We have actually a number of ID systems in silos, disparate silo systems that today do not talk to each other. The National Identity Management Commission that has got a mandate to have the foundational data is one area that we want to focus on to ensure that every citizen, everybody is captured, because we believe everybody matters. So in order to do this, we've looked at the most cost-effective, the most pragmatic approach to doing this. So one of these, which you can see here, is we're offering to every citizen a digital national identity number. We're using biometrics. We're going to capture as minimal a number of attributes as possible, 8 to 10 fields with biometrics. We are looking to ensure that the verification for access to services is critical, and there's interconnectivity into the NIMC system as part of what the program will be. Also, we're embarking on, which is also a massive project, we have the civil registration program with National Populations Commission. We're going to connect registration of birth into identity, so it becomes so seamless. So we're able to capture people from birth all the way through as the exits, as we all will exit the system. But what this does, it opens up total connectivity. Again, I suppose for the vendors that are here, we will work with vendors that want to partner us. The era of procurement is over. It's partnerships, collaboration, and we will ensure that we have flexibility in terms of that. We've embarked upon giving RFPs that should be out very soon. And finally, what is extremely critical, and a lot of this was talked about yesterday, is the issue of privacy, is the issue of confidentiality of data. We're working with our development partners to ensure that best standards, international standards, are followed to build a solid legal framework that helps with confidentiality of data, privacy, and combat cybersecurity. Actually, this slide I've been given a mandate that instead of 3 to 5 years, we must do this in 2 to 3 years. This is the executive mandate, so we're hoping we can do that. And at the end of the day, we should have what in Nigeria should be, or rather in Africa, should be the largest digital identity system after Aadhaar. Actually, the second largest in the world. So this gives you, this depicts a pictorial view of how we see the system talking to each other. So we have NIMC in the center, and the idea is every other functional agency will be able to retrieve information from NIMC. It will be seamless. The system will be cutting-edge technology that allows for to overcome latency issues. So the concerns that have been raised by some of our other partners, some of the other stakeholders in the functional identity system, this has been taken on board. These are indeed very viable concerns, especially in situations where we've had some of them that have gone ahead of the curve to have solutions in place. So we have today very popular BVN, which is done by the central bank and NIBS. We have immigration. So to give them comfort and to give them the belief in the system, we're ensuring that the NIMC system will be with cutting edge, and it will support full harmonized synchronization of data. So we're expecting that what we should be left with in a system like this is a situation where, if you look at the picture that you have in your ID system that sits with NIMC, is the same picture that should be across all other agencies of government. For us, it's one government. It's one government that the citizens want to talk to, and they want to get their information in the same harmonious way. One thing that is also important to speak about here, and I'll touch more later, is this gives us massive saving, cost savings over the long term. We take away the need for different agencies of government collecting biometrics. And it also takes away the challenges with privacy. I'm sure you all agree. So the approach that we're taking is very simple. Working with the harmonized ecosystem, we're going to work with this functional data agencies as they register. There's a mandatory for them to register you for NIN, which will sit and reside with NIMC. For every registration that you do, you will register into NIMC, and then you will carry on with your own registration for your own functional role. So this actually tries to depict this. And what does that also mean? It means NIMC do not have to start your entire new projects of registration, but work with the partners based on standards set by NIMC, based on the attributes that have been shared. So NIMC in itself also actually, we see NIMC in the role of a regulator of ID and provides guidance. So from wherever you are able to work with all the functional agencies. If you want to do driver's license, first you must register for NIN. If you want to get a new BVN, you must register for NIN. If you want to do primary health care, you will register for NIN. So as we embark on many programs, we use one stone to kill several birds. Again, I think it will be useful to share with you some of the use cases. What drives us in this belief and confidence of this approach. Today, a number of startups are trying to do e-commerce program. E-commerce business. But they're challenged. The challenge with being able to identify you. What the system brings to bear today is the ability to actually have a solid, credit-worthy system whereby, because you're interlinked across all areas, from the banking industry to your travel documents, your driver's license, it means that we can build a solid credit system and then allow for e-commerce to work, because integrity of data resides with NIMC. So this just gives some of the opportunities that are birthed as part of this harmonized ecosystem. Again, a challenge that we have in Nigeria, for those of you visiting, is driving licenses. Again, anonymity issue, we want to overcome the issue of anonymity. Today, you really, even though people have ID, but you really can't track them. What this allows is the ability to track people, the ability to enforce crimes or offenses that are committed. This is in line with when I say building a socially responsible society. Again, some benefits that we'll get: seamless renewal of driver's license. You want to renew your driver's license, verification is done with NIMC. The opportunity allows for you to, without actually being worried about visiting the registration office again, information is shared back to you. Again, this touches in terms of efficiency of governance, efficiency of government. For us, again, we see it as one government, and one government interfacing with the public. Another use case which is key: you want to change your name because you've gotten married for other reasons, you come to a NIMC or you come to any other agency of government. That details is shared and updated on NIMC, and this spreads across every other system. I share these use cases because it's important to understand this new approach to ID. For us, ID is way past gift cards. ID is becoming a digital economy, becoming a digitally progressive country. So ID, as in just for purpose of I'm going to the market, is much more than that. It fosters all these different use cases, and much more. And maybe music to DJs here. These are also opportunities for revenue generating for NIMC going forward. So the issue of privacy, the issue of data protection, it is very key, extremely key. All over the world, we've seen the challenges we see with Cambridge Analytics, with the Facebook. So as a responsible government, we are working closely with our development partners to ensure, working with top law firms in Nigeria, we put in place solid legal framework that provides credibility to what we're doing. Probity is in place. We want to ensure that the use of data is for progressive purpose, is for efficiency, is for transparency, is for ease of doing business, as opposed for any other dark side, blind-minded thinking that might come across. Data is extremely key. Data is the future. For me, I actually see data as our next big asset after oil. So we must harvest our data. We must mine our own data, and we must refine it and use it to move forward. The opportunities today, we're able to reach people in the far rural, giving them education, giving them knowledge, giving them information because of technology. So the data is key. It's the abuse of data that we must ensure that is taken care of and is protected. The people are well protected. So I like to share this because I think it's extremely important to understand how far we've come and what has been driving us. This mandate has full executive order. I'll talk to that in a second while I talk on the timelines. And this is currently today how it works. The Vice President is the chairman of the Harmonization Committee, so he gets a regular update. Ministry of Finance is closely working with us, the Office of the SGF. We also, the SGF, come and declare open the program yesterday. It's fully abreast. Again, part of what we've done in order to move faster, especially because the original plan of 3 to 5 years has been asked to cut down by 2 years, is we put in place a task force. So this task force is actually dynamic. Because we're running this project in sort of phases, we're going to pull the heads of the different functional agencies that will sit atop the executive and provide updates as and when we're working with them. In some cases, it might be multiple agencies. So the idea is to ensure that it has full backing, there's traction, there's governance, and there's transparency in how we get things done. A big aspect of this is the campaign awareness. We are working closely to ensure everyone is fully aware of the benefits. I know the challenge today, there were talks around asking people to pay. I am personally against that. I think government wants to get the data. Government is very key to get the data. So we will go all out. In fact, I go as far as saying the government should pay for the data for registration. But we will go as far as ensuring we engage the traditional rulers, religious leaders, local agencies, civil society, in reaching out and sharing the benefits of government. Today, the benefits have been received. However, we must drive identity as part of it. So a big aspect that we're already embarking upon as part of this program is the awareness of what ID means and the importance of ID. So finally, let me just share with you some updates on where we are. So when we came into government, the president had given the mandate to have an harmonization committee set up, and then His Excellency, the Vice President, was mandated to chair this. And this has gone on for coming up to 3 years now. So one of the first strategy workshops we had was in December 2016 with development partners. And we worked for about 13 months to come up with the strategy roadmap, which has total imprint of Nigerians in it. We sat in different rooms on many, many occasions to birth this document that meets our own ecosystem. And today we had that adopted 31st of January this year. We presented to His Excellency the Vice President. As part of the other mandate is that we will have it for the Economic Management Team for consensus building and for ratification by the Federal Executive Council. Today, it's a World Bank funded program. We've achieved project preparatory activities funding that's been approved. The next phase is for the FEC approval, as I said, and then we will hope to have adoption of the legal framework recommendations, which is critical to move into the next phase by June this year. In closing, I think, again, I would just like to touch on some key things. One of them being that, I said yesterday, funding has never been our challenge. Not at all. In fact, we've had funding over many, many years that we've tried to do ID. We've done it in different aspects. It's just that we've never been able to put it together. So the importance is to have a well put together that saves us huge cost over the long run, because then there's no need to have to capture Nigerians anymore. Huge amount of money spent around census. That should be curbed as part of the civil registration and birth, plus the benefits on knowing our citizens. That is, you can't put a price to that. So I want to appeal to our working partners. The approach is, let's work together, let's make this happen, and let's look at it in a fresh and a digital way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Landre. That was very interesting, and I think it was very good to see that Nigeria has a solid digital identity strategy with the ambition to have a long life ID and an ambitious plan to implement that within 2-3 years. And maybe we'll touch upon that point when we enter into the discussion afterwards. So again, a warm round of applause for Mr. Landre. And with that, I would like to introduce the second speaker, Mr. Tunji, who will speak about blockchain in the context of identity. Please go ahead.
Distinguished guests, Ladies and gentlemen, good morning all. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I give my thanks to the board and the management of the National Identity Management Commission, the chairman, and the Director General, Chief Executive Officer, Engineer Aliyu Aziz. My name is Olatunji Durodola. I am currently technical consultant to the National Identity Management Commission here in Abuja, Nigeria. I have been with the Commission pretty close to about 6 years, and it's been a privilege to have served in various capacities over those years, harnessing and getting a lot of experience and ideas, interacting with vendors and various stakeholders and partners. So I want to build up on what what the last speaker spoke about, Larry Oshibono, and give a little background as to what NIMC has been facing with a few challenges about enrollment, identification of individuals, the few teething problems with harmonization, and then I'll just touch on what NIMC is currently planning to do with the blockchain, which we've probably heard about. And if we notice that yesterday in the speech on behalf of His Excellency Mr. President, the federal government has actually started looking into blockchain as a possible solution to some of the challenges that we are facing and have been facing. So let's move ahead. So first of all, one of the challenges that we have in Nigeria has been to, there have been different kinds of problems that have been coming up over the years. Multiple identities, intrusive know your customer, having to bring stacks of documents because you want to get identified for one reason or the other. Lack of proper health care because they don't know who you are, where you're coming from. A lot of us know about some of the challenges about illegal migration through different channels, which we need to stem and tidy up. Sex trafficking, multiple IDs, you have BVN, you have your TIN, you have your driver's license, all kinds of different tokens. And these are, the populace in Nigeria are weary. They're just tired of multiple enrollments for different things over and over and over again. So what we are trying to do is to say, you know what, let's come up with a holistic solution that will address a lot of these problems, promote a single version of truth, harmonize all these ID tokens, offer a simplified verification system, and make sure that these things are streamlined in such a way that wherever you go in your aspects of daily life in Nigeria, you don't have to continue to come up with different types of identity. So that's the main goal. But one of the challenges in Nigeria, of course, is, notice in this slide I said brother, brother, or brother. That's because there are different types of brothers that we have, or sisters in Nigeria. You have your biological brother or sister. You have your cousin or your relation, who you also call your brother or your sister. And then there's the African brother. So this is one of the challenges that we have on the continent, not just in Nigeria. So we need to be sure that this person is who he says he is. There are also instances where you have identical twins or triplets, and one person may try to assume the identity of the other. There was an example recently where somebody wanted to come and pick up their national identity card. The person was actually in Lagos. It was a lady. She was in Lagos, and she sent her identical twin to come and pick up her cards from NIMC. Now, NIMC does not allow card collection by proxy. You have to submit your fingerprint, which will be run against your fingerprint templates on the chip. And they tried it several times, and it was failing. So they asked her a few questions, and then she admitted that it was actually for her twin sister in Lagos. And she said, sorry, this is not allowed. So these are some of the challenges that we have been facing that we're trying to address. Then, of course, like I pointed out earlier on, one of the other challenges that you have so many functional tokens, like Larry pointed out. You have your driver's license, you have your passport, you have your tax ID, you have the health insurance, voter's ID, and on and on and on and on. So at some point, the challenge then is that you have multiple tokens, practically doing one thing or the other, and for each time, you have to go through the entire gamut of the enrollment system, which then gives you your TIN, your VIN, and so on and so forth. So, what is the solution? Just, this is a different picture representation of what the previous speaker pointed out, and basically, that is that for almost every aspect of Nigerian life, you need to have a national identification number. It's going to be, NIMC is building very strong regulatory backing to that to make sure that whether you are running a bank account, whether you have multiple phone numbers, whatever it is, you must be identified with your national identification number. And they're going through great pains to make sure that no single individual will have more than one national identification number. Now, let's move on to the next thing. So the whole idea is to make sure that you have one single identity known to you in anywhere in Nigeria. So if you're a citizen of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it doesn't take away the fact that each agency has their purview, which NIMC does not have any intention whatsoever to assume. But you have that single identity. So whether you go to, whether you're driving a car or whatever it is, that identity will be one and single. Now, I'll just quickly move on to what NIMC is trying to do with the blockchain. So, a lot of us have heard about blockchain. Now, when NIMC takes all these identities, harmonize them, and put them in that repository, the next question is, what then is given back? You can't just take all this data in and not give something back. So once you have done that harmonization and it is there, then the next thing is to make sure that we offer or build an infrastructure where you have e-services that are available on a variety of opportunities and devices. So there's so many, hundreds of thousands of smartphones and tablets all around Nigeria. Thankfully, because of the prevalence of cheap technology that comes into Nigeria, everybody has access to one smartphone or the other, whether it's Android or iOS or another. So what NIMC is trying to do is to make sure that we build up a private blockchain whereby when you are identified or verified, you need to be verified in one aspect or the other, whether you go to a bank, whether you want to get a SIM card or the other, then you can be identified, and that transaction then is accruable, is a billable transaction, which NIMC will share with the resident agency. So in other words, if for example now you want to get a SIM card, you'll be verified against your identity will be verified on the blockchain, and that transaction itself will then be available on that private blockchain. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that you get a digital identity, and all your tokens will then be represented with pseudonyms like a doppelganger, and you will be given blockchain-style addresses to mask and to protect your identity. And we'll make sure that if, for example, now you go to get a driver, you've gotten a driver's license and you want to pay your taxes, for example, and they scan your digital wallet, what would then happen is that if they are asking you for your ID for your driver's license, it's only the blockchain address related to your driver's license that will be valid and verifiable, because we want to make sure that privacy is going to be paramount at all times. So one question that we then ask is, how are these blockchain addresses going to be generated? First of all, your digital identity will be presented. There was a way in which we wanted to construct it at first, but the Director General said no, and he's a very technical person. He said, as soon as the person has a digital identity, a national identification number, he or she must have a presence on the blockchain. So we had to start reworking it to make sure that you have that identity on that permission blockchain. So a digital wallet is then created for you, and as the harmonization takes place, then each one of those tokens is then presented on the private blockchain as well. And what we do is we make sure that to protect those identities, we adopt a double digital hash, a SHA-256 hash, to make sure that the identity is properly protected. Now, the private and public key pairs that are generated, again, we also need to protect those as well, especially the private keys. Now, NIMC currently has a very robust infrastructure, public key infrastructure, of which includes a device called a hardware security module. So we'll make sure that those private keys are securely protected in those hardware security modules, and NIMC continually undergoes regular internal and external penetration testing to make sure that that data is not compromised in any shape or form. So the result is simple. First of all, you have a person identity, a single person identity. That's the starting point. That's the baseline criteria. Thereafter, so once you have that single version of truth, the next thing is to effectively do the harmonization to make sure that all the stakeholders have access securely to that, that database. Then the next thing to do is to build, you build the truth, and the next thing to do is to build up the trust. Because the fact that you know who I am doesn't mean that you can actually trust me. So over time, trust will then be built up, and we want to make sure that access is given to almost anyone, banked or unbanked, to credit facilities. So that credit profile needs to be built from the ground up over time. It's going to take time, but it's doable. The next thing I want to do, as I quickly round up, is to talk about, just briefly talk about the advantages of this blockchain ecosystem. It means that only authorized agents will have access to it. It will be built on an Ethereum-style blockchain using an ERC20 system. Originally, we're trying to use multi-chain, but we've moved away from that. And finally, the pseudonymous nature of those identities means that they are not reversible. So if you see a blockchain address, you can't reverse it to identify who that person is, unless you are duly authorized to do so. Now, I'll just quickly round up by touching on a to-do list that NIMC has. Now, a lot of people see the National Identity Management Commission as the National Identity Card Commission, which it is not. It has the mandate to make sure that each and every person has a digital identity, but almost everyone expects to get a physical plastic card from NIMC. NIMC has, as part of its mandate, to issue a general multipurpose card, but that is not its core mandate. So there have been a lot of challenges to address the huge pressure that NIMC has been getting to issue these smart cards to individuals, and it is continuing to do so. And what it has decided to do is to totally outsource the card issuance and personalization to those agencies that, to those organizations that have the wherewithal to do so, whilst it focuses on being a regulator. In the meantime, one of the things it's going to do is to issue a virtual smart card. It is not a replacement for the physical card, but it will create an environment whereby when you need to be validated or verified somewhere, there will be a smart card available to you on your Android or iOS device. And NIMC will give appropriate backing, legislative backing, to make sure that if you go to a certain place, you will be verified on that. I'll just touch on that in the next slide. Now, it's also going to look at revising the NIN slip, because there have been some challenges with the NIN slip. You walk into a place and it's a bit difficult to make sure that that NIN slip can be verified. So we're looking into that as well. Then thirdly, NIMC has won quite a number of awards with the current iteration of the National Identity Smart Card, but is currently revising it, and the DG has christened it what it calls the classic card. We'll have some new features, including a contactless component, and we'll revise some of the components to make sure that we can harmonize all the tokens onto that smart card. And then fourthly is to make sure that this blockchain ecosystem is readily available. I have just one slide left, and that basically is the virtual smart card. So the smart card is going to be in two apps. The end user app, which you can actually see here, and at the bottom is going to be like a small dashboard where the verifier will be able to scan a code and verify that the image and the data that you're actually seeing there is authentic. There will be a second app for verifiers whereby they will scan that code and it will go through a very secure access to the blockchain, and that data will be verified, and even the portrait will reflect on the verifier's smartphone. It is a payable service, so NIMC expects to get a revenue for that kind of activity. The NIN slip, which is my last slide, is going to be revised to contain a QR code with a hash of the data that we find on the NIN slip, whereby all you need is a smartphone with a barcode reader. You scan that code and you go to the back end and verify and make sure that that information is correct. So ladies and gentlemen, all I'll say is thank you very much for listening. My last word is trust the information that is given to you, but verify. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tunji. Excellent. This is actually very inspiring that in the digital identity roadmap of Nigeria, we're not only talking about physical identity, but also thinking about how to use identity in the digital world, and in fact, setting up a digital identity wallet and using really advanced blockchain technology to be able to verify identity across different services. So there will be certainly an interesting topic later for the panel discussion. Mr. Kuller, is he already in the... Yes, you made it? Excellent. Are you ready? Yes, it is, yeah. So with that, I would like to invite the next speaker, Mr. Kuller, straight arriving from the airport, if I understand correctly. You look bright and shiny. Good luck with your presentation. Yeah.
Okay. I just need to push the button here, or? Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the organizers of this event to making this meeting happening. My name is Matthias Köhler from Mühlbauer. I'm Vice President of Sales and with this regards in charge of government solutions within the company. Today I would like to talk about integrated solutions, consolidated solutions. And I can see the advice has the wrong presentation on the screen. That's interesting. But if you want me to talk about extended aggregated feature, I will do this too. However, this was not the planned subject. Sorry? Well, I have it on my laptop, but then I need to play it on. Yeah? You want that one? Okay, they need to change the presentation. Sorry for that. Second try, now they should have the right presentation. Fantastic, thanks. Okay, consolidated identity management is a subject which is propagated by the World Bank, by the UN, by ICAO since about 3 to 4 years. And there is a good reason for this. When you look at today's identity gap and how fast it is closing, we can say that by the next 5 to 10 years, almost 95 to 98% of all adult people will have a biometric identity of one sort or the other. Government programs, civil programs, you can say the whole globe carries identities, biometric identities, with them. The subject, however, is that these identities are carried by different programs. When you look at it, this might be government programs like ID, driver licenses, passports, but even bank programs, travel programs of airlines, tax programs, and not least, programs from private companies like Facebook or other private vendors who these days work with biometric identifications. All these programs have their own enrollment processes, have their own data management processes, have their own document management processes, their own issuance processes, so they all live in their own world, catering for their own needs. And they have very little interaction. This has, of course, a huge impact on administration, on security, and not the least on cost. So what ICAO, what the World Bank, what the UN, but also what we as companies, and Mühlbauer in particular, propagates is that governments, nations, should look at a comprehensive solution approach, a comprehensive idea, an integrated system, which is based on a strong national database, a strong national register, from where you manage all the data of your people, where you link to all the applications, may it be a driver license, may it be a tax card, may it be voter registration, where you generate data for e-government, but also for the private sector. This reaches from refugee to visa, from visa to ID, from ID to passport. All of this should be done via a central registry, a central biometric system, where you then, in various ways, issue the applications to your citizens. Why is this such an important aspect, and what depends on it? Well, let me first talk a little bit what it depends on. Of course, to get such a unified approach, this has legislation, administrative, and technical aspects which need to be considered. We all know how it is. You know, the Ministry of Transport likes to have their system, the Ministry of Interior there, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there, the bank, another one. And all of them say, well, you know, we wouldn't mind to have a joint system, we wouldn't mind to have a national register, we wouldn't mind to have a trust center, but legislation is not in place. So, can't do it, we build our own. The next one says, well, legislation would allow it, but actually administrative, it's really a hassle. Till various ministries, till the various bodies come together, big hassle, takes too much time, we need something for us now, we cannot wait for the other departments. And last, different entities, different government bodies prefer different technologies. These are all reasons why this is not implemented globally, but only few lead nations have started to build on national registers. How can we solve this? Well, all it takes is political will, political support. This is not a question about technology, this is not about a question about administration, it's political will. Now, if we would have such national registers, if nations would have a national IT, a national identification, a national verification plan, if they would set this up, they could counter all types of nemesis they face, they need to deal with. May it be social discrimination, may it be crime, may it be identity theft, may it be ineffectiveness, and may it be, not the least, spending too much money for too little result. The benefit of a national register from which you issue all identities to your people, may it be a driver's license, a tax card, a voter registration, a refugee card, an alien citizen card, whatsoever. You have benefits which outweigh by far the political and the administrative efforts you have to make beforehand to come to a joint understanding of all the various players. In the long run, you prevent dramatically the theft of identities, fraud, you increase reliability, efficiency, you make your system more secure, more cost-effective, and by the way, more future-proof. And it's another thing, you change terminology. And terminology, I mean not just in words, but how you approach these projects. These days, still many people talk about the actual document, the actual card, the actual mobile application. That is the end of it. That's the most irrelevant part of all. This is like if we talk about a car, about which windows we put in or which headlights we have. The important is the integrity of the data, of the database. The integrity that everybody in the nation, everybody in this environment works with the same secure data and can retrieve from it and build on it its application. May this be a tax card, may this be an ID, may this be a bank account access, whatsoever. Now, let me wait. When we look at this, the heart of all of it is a national biometric person register. And again, I don't talk about, not about document management, I talk about data management. Register everybody securely. With an AFIS, with FRS, with IRIS. Maybe you start with an AFIS, you increase it later on to an FRS, and later on to an IRIS. But start registering everybody with the same system, with the same quality, nationwide, and invest there your money. And from that, you render your core services. Might be the identity verification, document verification, the use cases you wanted to use these documents or these identities for, maybe mobile or on hardware if you want so, on paper or on PVC. Data management, and I specifically say you manage the data over a whole life cycle of a person. You manage the document data also of the whole life cycle of the documents. And last not least, you can open this to third parties very easily in the private sector or in the e-government sector. Of course, such a national register allows you to provide easy interfaces, to whatever application and to whatever application body you want to refer to. If you have one central system which is built on one technology, it is easy to provide others with services. This goes, of course, also to all kinds of access. It can provide physical access, electronic access, but access also to services. Again, with the same data set, you just add applications, use cases actually, more than applications. You grant use cases, by the way, way cheaper than applications. This, of course, can be extended to any government use case, maybe border, census, voter registration, national insurances, etc. And to the private sector, banking, scoring, insurances, whatever you want. Now, the solution approach is always very simple. It all circles around a database, and I particularly say here not a document database, but really a database of the people's data. Accompanied by a strong biometric system, which can consistently be increased from one biometric trait to various additional biometric traits. But in this database, you hold your citizens' data, and from there you generate use cases and applications. Now, the benefit of this is, of course, that if you have one database, one AFIS system for your whole nation, you can also use the same enrollment systems, at least the same clients. You can use the same systems for enrolling an ID, a passport, a driver license, and so on, then for everything. In some cases, even in the same office. Good example in Germany, I go to my municipales, I can get the ID card from the same system as I get my passport, as I do my voter registration, for example. Extremely cost effective, extremely secure, because they always refer to the same database. Is this the person who he claims to be? And then the applications are cut-free. And of course, you can then use it to personalize or issue your documents as you feel fit. Either locally, decentralized, centralized, and in the various departments. Doesn't hinder you in any way or form to use then different systems for it. Same goes for your legacy databases. You know, if you have a central database, a central national register, you can generate legacy databases. For example, you can say, hey, but my driver license department, my Ministry of Transport still likes to have their own legacy database, so they can also look in it. So you build an interface, you let them pull or you push data across and say, hey, this is for your cross-reference. So you have the same system there, which is just customized out of my national registry for you. You can do the same in voter. Very fast, very effective, very low cost. When you look at this holistic approach, it makes you efficient, it makes you fast, it makes you cost effective, it makes it secure. I want to give you an example. Congo-Brazzaville. Congo-Brazzaville started with the national ID card, but out of the same system, they decided then, or they used the same system for issuing passports, expatriate cards, tax cards now, the latest project they added on, and so on. So they have one national registry, and they enable every other government institution to build up on, to either retrieve data from it and issue their documents, or issue the documents directly out of this system and build the use case up in it. Very fast implementation, very low on service, very fast very cost effective. By the way, very fast in implementation. The benefits are obvious. Besides effectiveness and costs, you also detect very easily if people generate or have generated in the past double identities in various systems. And by the way, you will be surprised how often this happens, that somebody goes and say, oh, I'm Mr. Köhler in the ID system, because it's with the Ministry of Interior. And then he goes to the passport people and say, oh, but I'm Mr. Brunner. And then he goes to the driver license system and say, I'm Mr. XYZ. That is not that uncommon. And for example, in Congo, we detected 90,000 double identities, for example, just in government offices. Yeah, of course, $15 million saved just in the first year. Just an effect of having a workable national register. In Uganda, same thing. When you look in Uganda, it started with the ID card, then we made children's ID, we made foreigner ID, we said voter registration being generated out of this, and with this central database, with the central national register, we not just detected in a first step 500,000 ghost voters, but in a second step, the national voters registration was basically generated within a 1 week's time, not a 3-month process. Voting was much easily executed. So besides the cost effect, there we also had a real security effect in a very, very fast way. So when I come to it, I can only recommend to everybody, if nations think about implementing new ID schemes, new ID solutions, think about a nationwide, cross-ministry, cross-sector, cross-private government approach. Think of national registries as your basis. Don't think of the document at the end. Think of the data in the front. Makes it fast, cheap, and effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Köhler. Take a seat at that panel for afterwards. So it's good to see that there's so much knowledge also at the vendor side about this harmonized identity. Thank you again. With that, I would like to welcome our last speaker, Ms. Deborah. And Ms. Deborah will speak about standards, which are inevitably very important if you think about connecting different systems. So feel free to enlighten us.
I don't see the presentation. Hello, everyone. If you look at the conference program, you will see that there should be Alban Ferrand speaking. So he's not attending, and I will cover. I'm clearly not Alban Ferrand, and I will be replacing him for this speaking slot. So my name is Deborah Comparin. I'm Market Development Manager at IDEMIA, but I'm also the head of the SIA, Secure Identity Alliance Task Force on Standards. We heard yesterday and this morning that there are many aspects that we need to cover, to look at, if we want to achieve harmonization of identity schemes. We look at legal frameworks, we look at architecture and solutions, and what I would like to cover today, and what I think it's important, is standards. Actually, technical standards play an important role in achieving this goal, harmonization of ID schemes. And in particular, I will cover what the Secure Identity Alliance is doing about it. So Secure Identity, just one word on SIA, Secure Identity Alliance, is a multi-stakeholder organization. We are looking at supporting the development of legal identity. If you want to find out more, just please feel free to come to me after the session, and I can give you more details. So we all know that technical standards is that set of regulations and best practices that are commonly understood. But why are they important to achieve harmonization of ID schemes and interoperability? So first of all, I heard it even mentioned earlier about vendor lock-ins. Standards prevent vendor lock-ins, meaning that they prevent governments to be stuck to a technology provider by putting in place some technical regulations. So for example, the hardware or the software in a biometric system, or in ABIS or AFIS, whatever that is, they should be able to interface and talk to each other thanks to a set of defined standards. So the government, if you want to replace one component or the other, be it software or hardware, you can do it. And you don't have to replace the whole system, so you're not stuck to that technology vendor. The second aspect is purely interoperability. So that could be interoperability in a country, but also among countries. One example of this one is, for example, the passports in the European Union. It's one example of a passport. Each one of us, I'm from the European Union, so I have a passport for my own country, but it's actually understood and managed by all the rest of the countries as part of the European Union. So that's one example, but there are many others. And the last part, which may be a bit less obvious, is security and privacy, which is actually very important. So we have standards covering this aspect. So think, for example, of a digital signature, how to encrypt those data, or there are standards about a privacy framework. So all in all together, helps to achieve interoperability. So what standards are available? So once we understand that the importance of it, we look at what is available there. So I tried just to list, it's not a comprehensive list, but try to see what aspects standards cover. So they look at data, from data collections to storage and data usage, but it goes to a format and features of credentials, so on and so forth. Standards are normally developed by different bodies, so be it international bodies. So I think the most, we all know about ISO, for instance, or ICAO is another example. But also we have national bodies, like the NIST, for instance, in the States. And finally, we have industry consortia. So I think we can infer that the standard body, we have a rich standard body, we have a lot of standards available, at the same time developed by different agencies. And that is perhaps a challenge. So it's an opportunity because there's a lot of material out there, but the challenge is to understand how to navigate all of this. So if you look at the ID4Africa guideline, you will see that Joseph Attic wrote an article, I think it's at the very beginning of the guideline, and at the end of the article is he has built a table collecting the main important technical standards if a government wants to roll out an ID system. So this gives you a hint of the need to try, how difficult it is to try to understand what is relevant when you have to write a tender specs, etc. So try to understand what it is that you have to put in there to make sure that you achieve interoperability, so harmonization, while respecting privacy and avoiding vendor lock-ins. So when we think about an ID ecosystem, I try to organize it in different bricks and components. So the first one is civil registry. So it's that repository managing vital events, so from birth to death and everything in between. Then we have civil identification, which can be thought as National Population Registry or a registry where we have a snapshot of the population. So in there, we have the people that are actually living in the country. And I don't mean necessarily citizens. It could be also residents or refugees or even visitors. And then you have functional registries. So all those registries that are linked to a specific scope. So for example, we have passport, driving license, safety nets, pensions, tax elections, etc., so on and so forth. On top of that, we should also not forget about interfaces. So those registries, and that's the aim of the theme of the conference, should be able to be interoperable and to talk to each other. So if we think of all the standards that we need to be aware of that are actually covering the whole spectrum, then you will understand that that is a complex problem, and there is nothing in place that can help us to navigate this. And that is, to summarize the challenge that I'm talking about today. So first of all is navigate standards. So there is no one-stop shop for standards. There's not a place or a guideline, a manual, something that I can use if I'm a country and I want to write a tender or specs, and I know that those are the standards that I want to use. Then more than this, standards are not complete. So we have rich history in standards. There is a lot going on, a lot of material available, but yet they don't cover all aspects of ID management ecosystem. And it's important to identify those gaps. Before identifying those gaps, it will be more obvious, let's say, if you have a manual or a guideline where you actually organize them, then it will be obvious to spot where we need to work to cover what is missing. And then finally, we shall fill the gaps. And that is what SIA is working on. And I will get into the details of this in the second part of the presentation. So I will talk about looking at these three aspects of the challenge, what the Secure Identity Alliance is doing about it, and how we are addressing this. So navigate standards. First thing, the most important one, guideline. We need to have a pragmatic guideline so that we are able, actually governments are able to go through all the available standards. And here, it's not just about listing them all, but we want to put in place to create a manual, a practical manual. So a reference on this. And that's the deliverable of this work. If you want to get a little bit more into details, what are the objectives of such manual? So first of all, it's not about listing standards. Maybe that's the first thing that comes to mind. You know? When I say we have to navigate this maze of standards, it's not just about listing them or just putting them into tables, but it's about finding a smart way to classify them. So a clever taxonomy, if you want, so that governments can understand for which component they need, which components they want to roll out and which standards are linked to that. So if I want to roll out just civil registry and I don't care about civil identification for the time being or other registries, I need to be able to locate them. And then inside that, you know, there's another world, which is how can I really find out which standards are applicable to me, are important to me, and which standards are also competing to each other. Because maybe it's less obvious, but standards are also competing to each other. So it's not just about listing them, but it's about giving some descriptions and explanation about what is different between the two, and then you can choose what is most appropriate to you. Finally, we need to look at the applicability of that standards based on the country context. So for instance, is there connectivity? Do we have 4G? Is it reliable? So this will drive which type of solution and therefore which type of standards you should insert in your RFP or in your tender. So it's a very pragmatic way of looking at standards world. It's basically a practical manual with a smart taxonomy. So maybe it's not that clear, so I just wanted to go through an example so you understand what I mean by smart taxonomy. So the example will just focus on civil registry. So the manual will look at all those 4 aspects of registry, so civil registry, CI, functional registry, and the interfaces. But for the sake of example, let's say that you have the manual here with you. You want to roll out the civil registry, you open, you go in the section of civil registry, and you look what's available in there. And the way it's organized. So we enter in the section of civil registry, and then we looked at what services civil registry should cover. So we know that civil registry is not just a simple repository, a database, but actually it responds to different services. So the first one could be data collection, so when you collect data of a birth, for example. Then we can see data registration, so it's about recording the data and give them legal validity. And then you need to issue credentials, and so on and so forth. So for each one of those services, you will be able to locate the appropriate standards. So for instance, we can get into the detail of data collection. So I know that I want to put in place civil registry. I'm looking at data collection. Inside data collection, then there's more to that. Is it something I'm looking at a solution offline or online? And then again, if it's offline solution, which are my standards available? So it's, as you can see, it's like a net basically. And we locate, it's a smart way to locate all the standards. So it's not just about this is the table, but it will be organized in such a manner. So this is an example on civil registry, but you can replicate the same thing for CI and all the rest. Once this is done, on a visual way, it will be very clear where the gaps are. So you will be immediately able to locate where there's some work to be done. And this will take us to the second part of what SIA is doing about it, and is filling the gaps. So we don't have the ambition to fill the gaps in standards, but actually we are aware of one gap that is around interfaces and actually data exchange among registries. And that is something that in parallel of developing this guideline, we are working on. So the deliverable will be an API with an implementation guideline. So it's an technical interface which will be open and available to all, so that you can use it for all your registries to be able to be interoperable with the rest, so to exchange data. So if we want to use the same diagram I used before, we will cover that brown part, which is marked as interfaces. This API will be, as I said, open, available to all, will allow for data exchange among registries, and very important point, it will be agnostic. Agnostic means that it will be vendor neutral. In SIA, we are developing this with the help of many technology vendors. So we are sure that it's not going to be tied or it's not going to be linked to one particular technology or vendor. So this will be shared by all technology providers, and you make sure that when you will use it, it's not linked to one particular company. We will hope that this is going to, we would like to develop this and to run a pilot, and we'd like that eventually for this to be considered as an open standard. Finally, why an API? Because it's an easy solution if you want to preserve legacy. Because the idea is that in many of your countries, you don't start from a green field. So you have already registries in place, and the idea is to achieve interoperability, so to exchange data by using what is already in place in the country. So we don't want to toss away everything that is there, but create something that can be integrated. It's like a hat put on top of your registries that can allow the exchange of data. So just a few words on the methodology. I will not get into the details. But I think it's important that you understand how we are proceeding about, how we are going about developing this. We are focusing on civil registry and CI, civil identification. So I think that to be successful, we need to start small. So the idea is not to develop a generic API that works for everything, but is to focus on the integration between civil registry and national population registry, for instance. So we will look, what does it really mean interface? What does it really mean exchanging data? So we need to define this. So once this is defined, you will understand exactly what the API does. So to define this, we need to look at the services that we want to cover. So this is an example that all of you are familiar with, which is ID creation. So it's when you register a birth, for example, in the civil registry, you need to pass some data, like for example, the name of the baby, the surname, date of birth, etc., to the National Population Registry. And the National Population Registry, after recording all this data, sends back a unique identity number to the civil registry. So in both the registry, you have the same unique identity number and the same person registered. This is one of the obvious examples. But there are many other services, like you might just want to share an attribute or to retrieve an attribute or update an attribute, update an address, for example. So we are looking at defining these services, and then this is the example that you see here on ID creation. Once we create those services for each one, we need to define which data the API, so this interface, is expecting for the two registries to exchange. This is because, so technically, it can make sure that the right data is going the right direction and that the transaction is successful and complete. So in this particular example, the in data, so the civil registry that will, the data that the civil registry will send to the National Population Registry, the CI, will be the name of the baby, the surname, date of birth, etc. And what comes back is actually the unique ID number. It's not enough, so we need to define data type and structure. So it's about how do I send that data so that the other registry can understand me. So in this example, it would be could be with a tag, like for example, name equals, and you put the value, surname equals, and you put the value. So it's basically like saying we are speaking the same language. So the two registries are speaking the same language. Then more to that, there is routing, so the way the data they are shared, the protocol we are using. And finally, and I think this is important, is the quality of the interface. So we need to make sure that we take into consideration privacy and the necessary authorization when you exchange data, but also the quality of the interface features. So to summarize, what SIA, so standards is very important, is one important aspect to achieve harmonization of ID schemes. And SIA, Secure Identity Alliance, is actually helping out in this aspect. The very first deliverable, the very first thing we are producing is the guideline on standards, practical guideline for all the governments to navigate standards. And the second aspect is the development of the API. So we will locate and define the gaps. We know already one of these gaps is the data interface, is the data exchange among registries. And in parallel of developing the guideline, we will work on the definition of the open standard API available to all. I hope that's clear, and if you want to find out more or even how to be involved in this, please feel free to reach out to me. You can just talk to me after the session or at the booth of IDEMIA H1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. It is about time for a coffee break, but let's take the opportunity with these experts, our experts here, to take 10 minutes for a few questions. Actually, let me take the first question. I'm always intrigued by, I have a technology background, so I'm intrigued by technology. And what I hear are great things, are open standards, open interfaces, which is basically a common language in which systems talk to each other, which are essential for harmonizing systems. A thing which was not addressed here is the concept of open source. You see other industries where open source is quite successful. And open source means there's a different way of interacting with vendors, more developing software on an open source base available for everybody, without having a kind of license model behind that. Now, I was always wondering if that is a a perspective which is relevant also for the identity landscape. And since we have different stakeholders here at the table, it would be interesting to hear that view. And so maybe you can give your perspective from Nigeria on if open source is a topic of discussion in the policies for Nigeria.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That's a very interesting question indeed. And I was just signaling the Director General over there when you mentioned open source, because for many, many years, I have been a proponent of open source. In fact, my nickname is Linux Prophet, because I have always been carrying the mantra of Linux for many, many years. So it's interesting because even those who had for decades built an empire on proprietary solutions have now seen the light of day that if they really want to integrate with the global collective of different technologies, they have to integrate with some kind of open standards. And I'm most encouraged by the agnostic APIs that are being proposed here, because it therefore means that we can finally start to reduce this phenomenon of vendor locking. Look, there's nothing wrong with somebody investing in research and development, building up their own protocols or whatever. But when it gets to a point where you've sold your product to an agency, to a government, and they cannot move forward with so many different things because of the lack of that proprietary or open nature, then becomes a problem. So it's very encouraging to see that open source is now being widely seen as not as being the hacker's choice, but merely a tool that can, or a resource that can be used to make sure that we can expand and extend our opportunities.
Yeah. So it's definitely something you would consider in moving forward, yeah?
1,000%.
Yeah. What about the Secure Identity Alliance? Is that open source on the agenda in addition to open standards?
That's a good, I think it doesn't work. Works. Yeah, that's a fair question. Like I said, this task force is fairly new, and to be successful, we need to start small and to be very specific on our objective and driven. So this is our objective, and this is what we are developing. Then yes, there are some discussion around that. It's not planned for the moment. It might be in the future. But now, what we really think it's relevant and it's important to roll out is an open standard API. We really think that with all the vendors involved and working together to achieve this is really a first, and it can really make a difference. So we are focused on delivering this fairly soon.
Yeah, understand. So it's standard has the priority, but it could be part of a holistic approach later on in the process. Yeah, very good. Mr. Kuller, from a vendor perspective, open source, is that something that triggers you?
Okay. Let me not talk from a vendor point of perspective. I work for government, and in various institutions I'm sitting there. I find this, sorry, a phantom discussion. Everybody loves it, and every conference is up. It's a phantom. Because what is today's requirement really? If I give you an open source or closed source piece of software, that is not what the governments ask me. The government asks me, first of all, who is financing this project? Who is running this project? And what I see today out there is that governments tend to say, you know, I like to have an integrator, a vendor, who takes over the responsibility of the system for the next 5 to 10 years. Build, operate, transfer, public-private partnerships, build, operate, ongoing. Government shifting the responsibility more and more to the vendor and say, you know what? I tell you what I want, I tell you when I want it, I tell you the quality I want it, and I tell you what it can cost. Do you want to build it, and do you want to maintain it, and do you want to finance it the next 10 years? And if you want to do that, then you are my partner. And I pay you for every card, passport, service rendered out of the system. If you don't maintain it, if you don't upgrade it, if you don't get additional applications, I'm not paying you. So, this is the trend in the market today. 90% of all projects, government projects today, are run in such a way. And therefore, the governments don't focus so much anymore, is this proprietary or not, because they don't want to even touch their own system. They just tell the vendor what to do, when to do it, in what quality and how fast, and to which price. So functionality is the point. Second thing, why I think this is a phantom discussion. Proprietary or open, you need some experts to handle these systems. And being quite honest, there's only two ways. Either you rely on the vendor's experts, because these programs are huge, and you don't want to mess with it, because if somebody who has not built it makes a mistake, like in every other thing, the warranties expire. Or, and that's the other way, you enable the government to operate it. Means a comprehensive know-how transfer. Means I train the government institutions to operate the system. And by the way, this includes then the source codes. Yeah, and then again for the government, is this not relevant anymore? Is it proprietary or is it open? Because they have and they handle the source code today.
Yeah, very, very clear perspective. Thank you for that. What about blockchain? Is it relevant in there?
Hello, hello. Okay.
In the blockchain ecosystem.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think personally, I was saying to the gentleman that presented on blockchain, I think it's high time we look at how blockchain enables a whole lot of things in Nigeria, you know, from agriculture, from land registry to identity. So without a shadow of a doubt. But if you allow me, I'd like to speak to what Matthias' point. It almost felt like we had similar presentation, so kudos to Matthias. It's very current. However, on the issue of vendor running the PPP, I think in some projects, yes. But in a project like this, with identity, which is critical, sovereignty is important, use of data going forward is important, I advocate more for ownership by government. However, like I said earlier on, for me, it's very much around partnership for the vendors. It's partnership with the vendors. The days of procurement is gone. An agenda that we're trying to push, which for me is paramount, is skills transfer in this country. We have a massive number of young people, skilled workforce. So anyone that wants to work with us, it must be about investing in Nigeria, setting up a space in Nigeria, training Nigerians, transferring of skills. That is the agenda. So we don't just do project because we want ID. There's a whole gamut of opportunities that we're looking around this. So I say to the vendors, it's a whole new, it's a change agenda. It's a whole new gameplay now.
I can imagine, especially because we're talking about critical infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. I used my time. Are there any questions in the audience? Go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Okwe Olushola. I represent a UK-based startup that develops identity solutions. You've all spoken very well. My first question is with regards to the first presenter. And I like the fact that you mentioned social inclusion in this. And the fact that now there's, you said something about civil registry. Civil registry projects on the way. I'm just wondering, already the enrollment for national ID and other things, it's going up. But now, with civil registry and with this going on, aren't people going to feel like, okay, I've signed up for my BVN, for voter's card, NIN, now I need to sign up my daughter, my son. I just wonder, isn't this going to impede, enrollment? And wouldn't it make more sense for people to begin to see the benefits of the national ID for example, people in rural or unprivileged environments, they begin to see financial inclusion. So for example, things they couldn't do before, now they have credit facilities. Now things they couldn't buy, they have access to it. So if you run that in parallel, and then you then tell them, oh, these are the benefits. You touched on awareness, and awareness is nice, but if you begin to experience firsthand, this is the benefit of doing this. I think that that should run in parallel. So I just wanted to know, your thoughts about when this civil registry sign-up goes up. Don't you see this as an impediment?
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, it's about how can we show to the public, to the citizens who actually register for an ID, what their benefit is for having an ID, right? Yeah. What's your response to that?
I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Very good question, and it's an interesting one. So today, the beauty of it is that today, government has commenced a massive social investment program. There's a target to give conditional cash transfer to 1 million households. We've done close to 500,000. So that is going on already. So actually, we are bringing we've had the cart before the horse. We're actually trying to realign things. So we have to catch up with that to ensure that integrity of the people we're giving cash to is in place. We're rolling out primary health care to 8 million people in the rural. We're going to tie that to this identity program. We have a program called the school feeding program. 7.2 million children across Nigeria is being fed. We have to tie that to the parents of these children, to the cooks that cook for these children, to the farmers that they buy the farm produce from. So a huge amount of ongoing project. In fact, we are late to the game, so we have to catch up. We have to give the benefits. But like you also mentioned, the campaign awareness is what will bring all of this together. So we understand that's a big aspect of this program.
Okay, thank you for that. I have one more question. It's regarding blockchain. So, very good presentation. I just wonder, is NIMC just buying into the hype of blockchain? Because this is still new stuff. Yeah, it's got great promise. But the last speaker talked about standards, and the thing about new technology is you don't have standards yet. It's difficult to regulate.
Yeah, it's clear. So the question is about blockchain. There are not much standards yet on blockchain. So what is that? How does that work in that space?
Okay, so it's a very good question. Your question is in two parts. First of all, the Commission had taken a very careful look at the emerging technologies out there. It would be very, very wrong to take the largest identity database in Africa and just on a whim, because it's an emerging technology, to say, oh, let's also put it on the blockchain. So what the Director General had actually mandated was that there are a number of challenges that we're facing at the moment. People falsifying records, doing this, all kinds of challenges out there. How can we address some of these issues? And we found that using distributed ledger technology can help to address a lot of these issues. Also, in regards to transactions and verification and so on and so forth. So it was actually the other way around. It was not that how can we use blockchain? It was that there are certain challenges, and we found that the blockchain can actually address some of those issues. Secondly, as far as standards are concerned, one thing that the Commission is also staying 100% away from is cryptocurrency. It's not doing absolutely anything at all with cryptocurrency. There are built-in standards, so to speak, when it comes to smart contracts and other things relating to blockchain technology itself. Then we are building that on top of the standards, the ISO standards, the other standards and audits that the Commission does annually. So it's not veering away from the objectives of making sure that it adopts and maintains and conforms to international standards at all times.
Very good, yeah. I think we'll take one more question before we go to the break. Gentleman over there. One of you can choose. You can fight for it.
Thank you very much. My name is Steve Namwa. I'm from the National Statistics Office in Ghana. And as I sat listening to these presentations, I was just thinking about a profound statement that was made yesterday, that why are we right at B, or why are we at B? It looks like we are here talking about harmonization because we have missed certain first steps, okay, which Matthias spoke well about. That is establishing a credible national database of people where everybody can tap from. And I see that now, because we are in a very chaotic situation, we are spending all our efforts, our minds, money, trying to come out with softwares that will harmonize all these systems. And that's what I see happening now. And I think that if we go to the very first roots of having a credible national database, okay, let's say 50% of it, and all the functional registries can then just pick from what he wants and then do all the certifications that he wants in terms of their work. That will be fine for us. So I think that as we move on, we can adopt a two-pronged approach. Why political will is so important, that bringing these, making sure that these chaotic scenes in terms of harmonizing systems are brought together. We also don't lose sight of the fact that we have to strengthen the building of the national database. We don't have to overlook that one. Because when that is well established, I'm sure that we will not come thinking of how to harmonize things. Because nearly everything will have been done. And then our efforts and monies and things will be little in trying to harmonize the situation. This is what I think. I don't know what I might think.
Yeah, so I guess your remark is, why put all the effort on harmonization, just focus on the central national identity database and move from there, right? Would you like to comment on that?
Okay. I think it's a fair point, but just to quickly share with you our experience. So we've moved from, as I showed you in the presentation, we've moved from 5 million records to 30 million records. We almost spent a penny. And it's purely by harmonization. And what is it? Just migration of data, basically. That's what it is. But based on another agency that has the same standards as National Identity Management Commission, we intend to do that for the few agencies that have that same standard. There are some that have followed a different standard. So we will still work with them. We'll leverage the database, but we will use a more of a verification approach to build that capacity. However, what I must point out is a lot of those siloed databases have similar records. So there's still a huge percentage of the populace that have never been registered. So there's a need to actually go out and register them, capture them, and bring them on board. The mandate of National Identity Management Commission is purely get everybody onto the system. And that's what's going to happen.
Right. Okay. I think Larry actually pointed out one or two things I wanted to say as well. In his presentation as well, he also touched on one or two things which are very key. And that is that part of this harmonization exercise is to make sure that there is that single version of truth. It's not just about making sure that the person's name, the demographic data matches, but also the image as well. In the first phase of the exercise that NIMC has been carrying out, we found a scenario whereby the national identification number was linked to one of those particular tokens. But rather than when somebody walks into that establishment and needs to be verified, and then taking that national identification number and verifying against the national identity database, they were then verifying it against their own database, because that harmonization has also be done there. And then you start having artifacts in the background which the National Identity Management Commission would not allow because it conforms to ICAO standards. So the physical token that you got from NIMC had that standard. The one that was named, verified against this thing, had a different image altogether, which you mentioned in this presentation. So these are some of the challenges that we have identified. Moving forward, we are going to use regulation to make sure that once you have submitted your data to the National Identity Database, you must verify against that database. So it makes that harmonization a lot easier to do.
Thank you. I think that's a very valuable remark to close the session for today. I think the panel deserves a warm applause. It's very inspiring for me to see the harmonization efforts moving on and NIMC taking obviously the lead in this. So congratulations with that. We will close the session. We'll go for a break now and reconvene at 11:30, I believe. Thank you very much for attending.
all there.